circumstances are impossible to ignore. All point in one direction: a horrible crime committed as part of the armed aggression against Ukraine. The responsibility for this terror act lies on those who aggressively prevent Ukraine to effectively exercise its sovereign rights over its territory and airspace. It would not have happened had Russia not armed and instigated bands of separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk provinces. International community cannot stand by in the face of such aggression. The country has become a threat to international peace and security. We have been saying that all along, since the occupation of Crimea. Mr. President, mere facts. The debris of Malaysian plane lies in the area controlled by pro-Russian separatists. This recent weeks alone, the Ukrainian cargo plane An-26 and fighter jet Su-25 were shot down by pro-Russian separatists from high altitude. The third Malaysian passenger plane was deliberately shot down. Il-76 transport plane and half a dozen helicopters were downed by pro-Russian fighters at Luhansk airport and elsewhere. In June, the separatists boasted of holding the SA-11 Buk missile system. They claimed to have used the system to shoot down the An-26 cargo plane at high altitude. The separatist commander, Igor Strelkov, claimed to the media to have shot down another aircraft at the same time when the Malaysian Airlines flight was overflying the area. Mr. President, we are truly shocked by the number of victims among the civilian population in eastern Ukraine. Armed separatists, terrorists, and foreign fighters and their supporters bear the responsibility for the deaths and injuries among the civilian population, including children, women, elderly. The carnage must end. President Poroshenko offered the peace plan. Ukraine announced a unilateral ceasefire. The agreement in Berlin on July 2nd provided vehicle for the talks. Yet separatists and terrorists in east of Ukraine went on sowing terror, looting, robbing banks, racketeering, kidnapping, trafficking in humans. A massive and continuous influx of foreign fighters went unabated from across the Russian border into neighboring Luhansk and Donetsk. Along came T-65 tanks, Grad multiple rocket launchers, anti-aircraft guns, Taut anti-tank guns, BTR APCs, manpads, small arms. In fact, terrorists in Donbass hardly care to remove from their heavy weapons the markings of the Russian military units. Russian military helicopters and drones violate the Ukrainian space, as 40,000 troops are tented within minutes of Ukrainian border, in addition to 20,000 stationed in the occupied Crimea. Russian citizens, many of them veterans of conflicts in Chechnya and Transnistria, lead many of the terrorist groups. The Russian media channels pour assiduous anti-Ukrainian propaganda. The mouthpiece of the separatists, Live News, brags of the agility of rebels to shoot down any plane in sight. Any plane. Hostage-taking by the terrorists and separatists continues. The abducted and hooded Ukrainian pilot, Nadia Savchenko, was trafficked by separatists from Ukraine straight into Russian Voronezh pre-trial detention center. We condemn the unlawful detention of Ukrainian citizens in Ukraine. Russia must respect the norms of international law and release Savchenko immediately. We remain appalled by the deterioration in human rights situation in Crimea. Mr. President, Lithuania urges to conduct a full and thorough and independent investigation into downing of Malaysian Airlines flight, as agreed today by the Council. Lithuania urges Russia to unequivocally distance itself from any kind of direct or indirect support of the terrorists, separatists, or foreign fighters. Insurgents must lay down their weapons. Lithuania calls on Russia to collaborate with Ukraine to ensure security of the borders and to prevent weapons and armed terrorists from entering territory of Ukraine. We call on Russia to constructively cooperate in the implementation of the peace plan put forward by President Petro Poroshenko. Diplomatic solution is possible. Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within the internationally recognized borders, including Crimea, are non-negotiable and must be respected by all. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Lithuania for his statement. Give the floor now to the representative of China.
主席先生，我感谢费尔特曼副秘书长的通报。中方对马来西亚航空公司
Eastern Ukraine. On behalf of the Chinese government and people, I express deep condolences and sincere sympathy to the victims and their families. Safety of international civil aviation must be guaranteed. Our priority now is to establish facts. Pending that, it is not advisable to jump to any conclusion, make any assumptions, or trace accusations. We support conducting an independent, just, and objective investigation of the incident. We also call upon all the parties to offer coordination and cooperation in the process of the investigation. The recent situation in Ukraine continues to be turbulent. Armed conflict and incidents of violence break out frequently, causing loss of life and destruction of properties. China is deeply concerned about this situation. We hope the parties concerned will keep in mind the well-being of all the peoples of Ukraine, focus on maintaining regional peace and stability, keep calm, exercise restraint to prevent further intensification of conflict and confrontation. The crisis of Ukraine has gone through a complex historical and contemporary trajectory. Political settlement is the only way out. China has taken note of the constructive efforts made by the parties concerned in recent times to achieve ceasefire through dialogue and to promote a political settlement. We hope the parties concerned will remain committed to dialogue and negotiation, take into full consideration of the rights and aspirations of all the peoples in Ukraine, and give consideration to the legitimate concerns of all the parties concerned, so that the rights of all the parties can be satisfied in a balanced fashion. We support the efforts of the parties to effectively implement the consensus on ceasefire and strengthen dialogue and consultation on the basis of the Geneva Agreements in the search for a political settlement and the early achievement of stability and development in Ukraine. China respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries, including that of Ukraine. China will continue to adopt a just and objective approach, will take active part in the search in any proposal or initiative that will alleviate tension and promote political settlement, and will play a constructive role in the process. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China. I give now the floor to the representative of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President. The grounding of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 into Ukrainian territory on 17 July has shocked the world. We have witnessed the tragic death of 298 people. There were 28 Australians on board MH17. Our nation is in mourning for all of the victims. The news that the lives of 80 children have been lost is devastating. Flags will be flown at half-mast tomorrow across Australia. We extend our heartfelt sympathy and condolences to the families of all of the victims of this tragedy and to their countries of nationality. Our particular thoughts are with the governments and people of the Netherlands and Malaysia. There is mounting evidence that the crash was caused by a missile strike and was downed in territory not controlled by Ukrainian authorities, and mounting credible information that this was conducted by separatist militia groups acting with the assistance of others. We owe it to the victims of this tragedy and their families to unequivocally establish the facts behind this incident, to find out exactly what happened and who is responsible. If, as appears increasingly likely, flight MH17 was brought down by a missile, then this is, as Australia's Prime Minister Tony Abbott has said, an unspeakable crime, and the perpetrators must be brought swiftly to justice. There must be a full, thorough and impartial international investigation. We thank Under-Secretary-General Feltman for his message that the UN is fully ready to cooperate with any investigation and that ICAO has offered its investigative capacity. We also welcome Mr Feltman's advice that ICAO and the government of Ukraine are speaking regarding the issue of an investigation. There must be immediate preservation of the crash site and unfettered access for independent investigators. Safe access must also be provided to allow recovery of the bodies of those who have lost their lives in this tragedy. Undertakings brokered by the Trilateral Contact Group with armed separatists that control the territory in which the crash occurred to allow access must be upheld. Our Prime Minister has made it clear that Russia's full cooperation with all investigations is expected. The Council has just issued a press statement calling for investigation, accountability and for immediate access to the crash site. This is very welcome. But Australia believes, given the gravity of the incident, that it is not sufficient indication of the Council's resolve. Australia believes the Council should adopt a resolution which reinforces the need for access to be granted to the crash site and for a full, thorough, independent and international investigation to be carried out. Mr President, this is the 19th time that this Council has met to discuss the situation in Ukraine since the crisis began. Time and time again, the overwhelming majority of this Council has called for an end to the violence and destabilisation. Council members have consistently called for a de-escalation of tensions, for separatists to lay down their weapons and for genuine dialogue to commence. It is time for the equivocation and dissembling and false narratives of some to stop. In the 3 weeks since the Council last discussed the situation in Ukraine, the security situation in the east has become increasingly dire. Separatists have ignored repeated calls to disarm and have continued their attacks on Ukrainian military forces, facilities and border posts. 2 Ukrainian military cargo planes have been downed in eastern Ukraine in only the last week. The Ukrainian armed forces have responded firmly to these attacks. It has every right to restore law and order and has underlined its commitment to do so in a proportionate manner. Russia has a crucial role to play in de-escalating this persistently dangerous crisis. It must end its provocations and any support for separatist forces. It must control its border with Ukraine and prevent the flow of weapons, equipment and fighters from Russia into Ukraine. Russia must withdraw the large number of troops it has again amassed on the Ukrainian border. It must actively work to de-escalate tensions and use its considerable influence with separatist groups in Ukraine to that end. Further political efforts are essential. The 4-party talks in Berlin in the last 2 weeks showed some promise. The parties agreed on the need for a sustainable ceasefire, the resumption of the contact group, control of border crossing points monitored by the OSCE, and an extension of the work of the OSCE Observer Mission to include border monitoring activities. But we are yet to see results. These efforts must be redoubled. Mr President, we had thought the situation in Ukraine had already caused too much tragedy. The horrific loss of flight MH17 has added immeasurably to that toll. It is time for the international community to stand as one, to ensure those responsible for this tragic crime are held to account, and to make every effort to bring to an end the violence and destabilisation in Ukraine. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Australia. I give now the floor to the representative of Luxembourg. You have the floor.
Mr. President, I too would like to thank Under-Secretary General for Political Affairs, Mr. Jeffrey Feltman, for his briefing. May I begin by expressing on behalf of the government and people of Luxembourg my most heartfelt condolences to the families and friends of the 298 people on board the Malaysia Airlines flight which crashed yesterday in the afternoon near the Grabovo village in eastern Ukraine. Amongst the victims there was also a a British-Dutch family living in Luxembourg. We'd like to express our condolences to the governments and the people of the Netherlands, Malaysia, Germany, Australia, Belgium, Canada, Indonesia, New Zealand, the Philippines, and the UK. The international community owes it to the victims to shed light on the circumstances leading up to this tragic event. A complete, transparent, and independent investigation should be conducted successfully as promptly as possible. Safe and unhindered access should be guaranteed for international investigators as well as to OSCE monitors and the representatives of concerned countries. All concerned parties should fully cooperate to these ends. We welcome the readiness of the Ukrainian authorities here. Those who have perpetrated this heinous crime should be held accountable. Sir, this aviation disaster is part of an ongoing deterioration of the situation in eastern Ukraine. Day after day, we've been receiving reports of civilians killed